This is the No BS Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Shanks. In this show, we look behind the curtain of financial services to find answers to the biggest questions no one is asking. Join me as I welcome industry influencers, outside business leaders, and inspirational game changers for real, no BS conversations that will challenge you to think big. I want to motivate you to find purpose and fulfillment in your career. Now on to the show. Welcome to the No BS Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Shanks, and today we're going to be discussing finding purpose and fulfillment in life. I am so excited to talk about our guest today. It's Michael Clinton. He's an American writer, photographer, and former magazine publishing executive. He was a publisher of GQ magazine from 1988 to 1994, and he was a senior vice president and executive vice president of Condé Nast until 1997. From 2010, he was the president, marketing, and publishing director of Hearst Magazine and also served on the board of directors of the Hearst Corporation. After retiring in 2020, he remained the senior media advisor to the CEO of Hearst. What I'm really most excited about today with Michael is his new book. The new book is Find Purpose. And what are you after with the next chapter of your life? Michael, thank you so much for joining me.
Ryan, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here to talk to you and to talk about Roar, my new book that just came out. So let's jump in.
So let's start off with Roar, right? You know that's the name of it. That's the title. Tell me what it means to you.
Well, one of the things that I thought about when I was coming out of the day-to-day, an intense day-to-day long career, is everything you read and you saw and you talked about with friends and colleagues was about winding down. And I wanted to wind up because, if you're 60 and healthy today, you're going to live to be 90. And so what are you going to do with 30 years? You've got this incredible gift that if you're healthy and you've taken good care of yourself, you can have an entirely new second career, a new lifestyle, a new act, a new whatever it is that you want. And I wanted to put a spotlight on this because all of the other conversations that were out there were about the big wind down, and I wanted it to be the big wind up.
So let's back up for a moment. So that's really incredible, right? First of all, I can appreciate that. I'm coaching a bunch of 10 to 12-year-old girls in lacrosse. And, that's such an early sort of, you talk about the wind up scenario. They haven't really arrived at that, but I want to back up a moment. I want to let everyone that's listening get to know you. Why did you want to get into the publishing industry, right? So when you think back to where you sort of got into this space, what was the driver for that?
I came from a very poor working class family in Pittsburgh. And so I went to a public school. And when I was in high school, I really got turned on to reading and words. And I had a particular teacher who was a mentor to me, an English teacher, who really taught me that there was a whole world out there above and beyond my sort of working class neighborhood. And so words carried me into college, words carried me into my profession. And I decided that I wanted to become someone who lived around words and ideas and concepts. And that's what publishing is all about. So, I literally hopped on a plane with $60 in my pocket and went to New York City and said, okay, let's do it. And I think I was about 22 at the time. And I had a couch to sleep on for a couple of months until I was able to land my first gig.
That's incredible. I will tell you something. I think that, you always wonder and you always see people who are so incredibly successful. And, you make assumptions that certain things were given to them. I think it's safe to say that, you've been on an incredible life's journey and there's a humility that's sort of tied to everything that you've done. You've worked around amazing people and some of them very, very famous. Have any truly changed your life? And I don't mean in the perspective of financial or sort of accolades around being famous, but I mean truly change your life in terms of the private conversations that you have and steering you down maybe a different path?
Well, it's true in my profession, I got to talk to world-class athletes and world-class celebrities and business leaders and presidents, pretty much every sitting president I've been able to have time with. And it's all been inspiring and amazing. But I had the good fortune of about 20 years ago launching Oprah Winfrey's magazine with her and with a team of people that, were at the company. And Oprah is an incredible story unto itself, as you know. And, Oprah's tagline in the magazine was always live your best life. And she was and is an amazing inspiration. And people always say to me, what's Oprah like? And I say, what you see is what you get. I mean, she's an incredibly open, friendly, gregarious, insightful human being. And so I think that I learned a lot from her through that process. And so, it doesn't get better than that. Most of the other folks that I would sit with, it was mostly about, if I'm sitting with Michael Jordan, he was on the cover of GQ. So it was about his cover and about what he was doing. If we're doing a meeting at the White House, it was around an initiative that might have been for children or for women. So a lot of it was more in the context of businessy stuff versus with Oprah, there was a lot of different conversations about a lot of different things. So I'd use that as probably my best example.
So let me ask you a question. If you were giving someone advice that is coming into the world wanting to try to make an impact. So, I mean, obviously you and I have talked. I work in wealth management. You are much more broad in terms of sort of what your experience has been and your exposure has been. What advice would you give to someone who's coming in, they're green, they don't really know what they're doing? What's the advice? What do you do day one? What do you do week one, month one to sort of go out there and try to engage the right way to kind of arrive at the conclusion that you've reached in your life?
The first thing I would say is don't give up on what your younger self wants to do and the passion that you have. We all know the story of the person who wanted to be an anthropologist, but they were talked into being an accountant because it was more practical, or someone who really wanted to take a shot at being a singer or an actress or an actor, but it was impractical. And life forces take you. It's your parents, it's your spouse, your partner, your friends who say, well, that's not a really practical path. I think that everybody deserves to take the path that they have passion for in the very beginning. One of the things I learned in this book and talking to people at midlife, when they're sort of stuck and they don't know what they want to do, I say to them, go back to your younger self. What was it that you left on the shelf that you feel bad about now? And one of the great stories was a woman who always wanted to be a mystery writer, a fiction writer. And of course, that's not a practical choice when you're 22, according to the rules, quote unquote. And at 57, she started taking writing classes and she started doing master classes with Dan Brown. She joined the Mystery Writers of America Guild. And to make a long story short, she wrote her first book at 59, which was rejected everywhere. She wrote a second book, which was picked up and published. She's 66. She's now published 6 books, mystery books. And she went back to her younger self. Don't wait until you're 57. Chase that dream early on and see where it takes you. You may take a left or a right turn ultimately, but at least you're going to chase that dream early on.
So that's really interesting. I know that my mother went back and finished college at a much later age, and it was a struggle for her because there was sort of this status quo that you didn't do it when you were in your teens or your 20s. So it's not really your place. And she did it anyway. So I know you've really accomplished some pretty incredible, I didn't really get into it with the intro because there's a lot to it. And I don't want it to be that I'm sitting here talking for 20 minutes about who you are. I want it to really be more about this conversation, but let's really get into that. Let's talk about what you've done in your life. You've published 10 books, right? 8 of them were based off of photography. 2 of them were memoirs. Most people never accomplish one of those in their lives. So I'd love to understand from you specific around the Globetrotter Diaries, which was really based off of visiting 100 countries. Tell me what that means to you, because I think that, we find ourselves in this interesting place in our world where, sort of coming out of COVID, I still call it the COVID hangover because I don't really feel like we've fully recovered from it, whether that's government mandated, et cetera. It is what it is. But you've gone and you've traveled around the country and you've experienced all these things. And I'd like to be able to communicate to those folks that live in small rural areas around the country, the ability to get out and do. What was the spark in your life early on that caused you to say, I don't give a shit about what the hurdle is. I'm going to get over it to get to what I want to get to?
So it's a great question. I mean, first of all, I think it's pure grit, but I'm gonna talk about something that's in the book. So ROAR is an acronym, and it is roar into the second half of your life. So it's targeted mostly to people at midlife, but I hear from a lot of 20 and 30 somethings who say, I love your book. It's a roadmap for my future. And each of the letters stands for something. And one of the letters A stands for the action plan. And I write about something called life layering, which will get to your question. So I was 39 years old. I had been an animal about driving a business career. I was the youngest publisher in the magazine industry in New York City, which can be a really tough, cutthroat industry. I got that job at 34, publisher of GQ, pretty cool job for a 34-year-old. And at 39, I sort of said to myself, I have a great job, I have a great personal and family life, and I'm the most boring human being on the planet. And people say, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, all I was doing was basically working. And it gets back to this notion that what you do is not who you are. And you have to start building out these other personas to create experiences for yourself. And I don't mean the persona of being a spouse or being a parent. I mean the persona of that is something just for you. So I have a bit of an adventure gene in me. So I decided when I was turning 40, I would go to Africa and climb Mount Kilimanjaro, and I would take a flying lesson. And I ultimately became a pilot and climbed many other mountains. But I made this proclamation that my 40s were going to be my adventure years. So I ran around the world in my 40s. I did all kinds of amazing things. And by the way, I continued to have a great personal life and continue to have a great professional life, but I was building this layer of adventure. And this layer of adventure is still with me today in my 60s. And in my 50s, and you mentioned photography, it's sort of serendipity. I had a friend, she said to me, let's do a pop-up photography show of all your photos from around the world. And I was like, yeah. I'm not a great photographer. I said, I'll do it if I can do it as a fundraiser for a board that I was on. So we had a show. I sold a lot of photographs. I fell onto all my friends. I begged them to support me, and they came through. And anyway, I discovered that I had this talent for photography. And so my 50s, I said, are going to be my creative years. And that blew up in terms of photography and so forth. So I started building all these layers to my life. So when I stepped out of my day-to-day job, which was my seat, what I did for a living, great job, I was able to say, hey, I'm an adventure traveler, I'm a marathon runner, I am a photographer, I am a writer, I am a this, I'm a that, I'm a this. I had all these personas that I had built. So I say to people, start building a layer to your life that is unique just to you and really build on it, because you'll end up having this big, amazing, multifaceted life. That's sort of the short version. In the book, you can read more about how you go about life layering, but that's sort of become my philosophy of living.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. So let's talk about the fact that you are an adventurer, right? And not everybody really subscribes to that. I think my wife would probably say that there's many occasions that I'm not willing to subscribe, but I'm curious, you've run 7 marathons in 7 continents. And I don't really want to talk to you so much about the fact that you did it, because that's pretty incredible. Most people could say that I want to go do it, and they could put it on their map. And then all their friends around them would say, that's incredible, you're a real winner. Well, you just went and you did it. I want to know, what was the driver? What were you trying to prove to yourself? And then I want to be able to correlate that back to your book and what that means to these latter stages of your life, because I think so many people live and they work their ass off to get to a point to where they can have sort of peace and freedom and flexibility and decision. And frankly, I mean, I'm a 48-year-old and I'm working my ass off. I've got a startup, and I volunteered and raised my hand to coach my 10-year-old daughter's lacrosse team. And one of my struggles, as soon as I did, is I went, oh my God, what am I doing? I don't really have time for that. And immediately I looked at my wife and I said, that's such bullshit. I'm working my ass off to build a company with shareholders and investors and partners. What am I doing it for? If I can't stop and go and insert myself into the lives that matter most where I am right now. So I'd love for you to be able to give me some perspective that if you could go back in time on one element, the advice you might give me as a 48-year-old father that's struggling with the time management and what matters most in life. And then perhaps the greatest wisdom in life is that you've gone through and had all these accolades, been around all these amazing people, but you've reached this moment in your life where you've realized that none of that really mattered. It's perhaps this last chapter that matters most.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a word in my business, in the magazine business, called editing. It's a word that everybody knows, of course. And I think that one has to be relentless about editing their life, relentless about editing. Sorry, that's my pup behind me squeaking her dog. Relentless about how they want to spend their days. Sorry about that. She'll work her way in here and I'll grab it from her. This is what happens, in the world of Zoom. Relentless about how you spend your day and how you, hang on one second. I'm going to get this from her.
Everybody listen to us. What you just heard was the reality of life we've all been living for the last 2 years in COVID. That is the life of hopping on a Zoom and having your child come in, having your dog come in, having your spouse come in. It's all good. It's all good.
I think this notion of being relentless about your time and relentless about how you want to spend your time, who you want to spend your time with, what you want to do with your time. And I think that I've sort of fine-tuned that to a science, because you have to make decisions. Sometimes they're not popular. I'll give you a great example. A number of years ago, I because I'm an amazing travel fanatic, I made the proclamation that I wasn't going to necessarily spend every 4-day Thanksgiving weekend, having Thanksgiving dinner, watching a ball game, and then that's the rest of the weekend. I wanted to go do something that was going to have more relevance and meaning to me. And first, everybody was cranky. And I said, come along. Let's go on a hiking trip. Let's go do something that's, more interesting and productive. Let's go to some of the national parks. Let's go do some early skiing. We can still have Thanksgiving dinner. We just don't have to have it in the usual format that we've had it in. So it's rethinking, a lot of the patterns and things that we have in our lives, and making sure that we're like squeezing every single minute out of our day in something that's productive. So I tend to be exhausting to people around me because I'm always looking for that value proposition. People will say to me, well, how do you relax? And I say, well, I go run 6 miles in the park. I mean, that's how I relax. I mean, I don't have to be a couch potato. We all have our own thing. So I think some of it's personality, but I think some of it is, what do you want to accomplish in your life? What do you want to leave in your life? What is your legacy? If someone's 50 or 60, I say to them, go to 90 and work backwards. What do you want? What's your legacy? What do you want? What is it that you want to accomplish? Obviously for your family, your children, your community, but for yourself, what is it that is going to be relevant and important in terms of your contribution? And you got to do the work. You got to really go introspective. I interviewed 40 people for this book, 40 people who I call the reimagineers, who all did some version of a major pivot at midlife. And the one common theme that they all had was they identified what their issues were, where they wanted to shift and change, or they wanted to be proactive about their future. And they went deep into themselves. Many of them said it took them a year. It took them a year of editing this out, editing this in. And I think, you got to do the work. And I think a lot of us, we kind of skate through life and we don't go down into the deep soul of ourselves and say, okay, what do I really want out of this thing we call life?
Michael, if you were to give that same advice based upon the research you've done, the book you've written, to someone that's running an organization that's trying to think about how am I hiring? How am I inspiring a culture to be able to come in and be a part of this? Because some of the concern that corporate America has is that if I get you too excited about post work, you just leave me altogether. Is there a happy medium? Is there a way to sort of be what you're talking about to be able to sort of sunset into that happy land? And if so, what's your advice to that founder or to that leader of that organization in terms of how they manage those?
There's going to be a reckoning happening in the business world. First of all, a lot of people are going to want to work longer and contribute in much bigger ways, but they're going to want to do it in a different format. They don't want to necessarily work the full-time 60-hour work week. You know, what's amazing is every day 10,000 people turn 65 in this country, and in 2030, 1 in 5 people will be 65. And they are not going to be, or older, and they're not going to be the 65-year-old that you knew. Many of them want to continue to work. They want to be entrepreneurs. The fastest growing cohort of entrepreneurs in this country are in their early 50s. So they're going to want to do new things. They're going to start new businesses, but they're going to not necessarily want to do it in the same way they did it in the first part of their career. And a lot of people are going to want to go and have a completely second career. Some won't, but you have to find meaning and purpose in what you're going to do, because you're going to have a much longer life and you're going to live a lot longer. So I think businesses and companies and corporations are going to start to adapt to ways to keep really great people in their world, but not doing it in the usual 40-hour, 60-hour work week.
It's really great feedback. Touching on that, I just read an article recently talking about, and it's not new news, but, sort of shifting to a 3-day work week or a 4-day work week versus a 5-day work week. Is there a way that we could prematurely arrive at what you are defining in your book earlier in life? In other words, could we hack the system, right? We're sort of trained and wired to go get educated, get training, jump into the workforce, get on the hamster wheel and hustle, produce what you produce, and do it for a period of time until you can exit. I think the premise of what you're trying to accomplish is, do you have to do it that way? Could you not do it different? Could you not have a bigger impact in a shorter window of time and perhaps have more freedom to do whatever else? So any advice for sort of just a general industry? Again, I live in wealth management. It's a very narrow vertical. But is there any advice that you have based upon sort of your life, what you've learned, and what you think might attribute to more efficiency and more happiness? Because that's a big thing that I'm big on is you got a family, you got kids, you got pets, you got things and hobbies that you want to go and do. Do you go and spend 60 hours a week in the job that maybe you like the least in your life? How long can you continue to do that? So what guidance do you have there?
One of the things that we look at, you're 48 and older, we look at the world a certain way. What's happening is the Stanford University just put out a great new study called The New Map of Life, which is that the 100-year life is here. And many people are going to live to be 100. That 5-year-old today who's had good prenatal and early child development, 50% chance that they're going to live to be 100. What is that going to mean? All the life cycles and all the lifespans are going to begin to change and evolve. You're going to be working 60 years, not 40 years. You're going to have to work 60 years in some way to be economically sound in terms of funding your lifestyle and your family's lifestyle, et cetera. But what that means is that this rush to have to do it all now gets spread out. And one of the things that I'm reading about in this study and in other places is that we're going to have to think in terms of having multiple careers, multiple work lives, lifelong learning, because what you learned at 25 when you got out of school is almost irrelevant 10 years later, if not sooner. And what if you're 45 or 55 or 65 and you got to keep working? You have to completely think about lifelong learning as a way to stay up on your skills and your experience. So one way to do in smoothing that out is acknowledging, especially if someone is younger, that they're going to live this incredibly long life and they're going to have to be thinking about work in a different kind of way. It's just not that bang it out and then I'm going to check out. You're going to have to really work longer to sustain your economic well-being, because as we all know, pensions are gone. We have 401ks. The one thing that is interesting is we're going to have the largest transfer of generational wealth in the history of the world over the next 20 years, which you probably know, $68 trillion worth of assets. Not everyone is going to be a recipient of that transfer. Maybe a lot of people are going to have to work. And the projection is that the fastest growing cohort of people in the labor force in the next decade or so are going to be 75 plus, because those people are going to not, some of them are going to want to work, but some of them are going to have to work. And that bubble of population is going to continue to grow. So it's going to be, it's scrambling up all of the life cycles and the lifespan that we thought we knew. It's going to scramble it all up in a whole different kind of way.
So let me ask you this, and I'm going to put you on the spot for a moment. And I'm going to do it because I think that you're totally up for the challenge, because you're pretty aggressive and you're willing to take on these challenges. And by the way, I love so much what you said about the traditional Thanksgiving. The picture you painted is the life I've lived for all my life. And we always wonder, like, could there be something different we do? I talk to my brothers. We do a trip once to twice a year. And it's typically like, it's drinking, maybe a little bit of fishing, but could we do something different? And could you do it, right? Could you actually, like, in your mind say it doesn't have to be what it was last year? And I love the fact that you challenge that status quo, but you do it in a way to where it's like, there's no offense. Like, we're all in this together. We love each other. Like, let's go on that walk together. The question that I've got for you is this. There's a lot of people that are really set in their ways, and they really have struggles. And now that struggle may be multi-generational. The struggle that I have in terms of how I apply my best self to life is I'm going to point to my mom and my dad. It's their fault. What's your advice to that generation that's sitting there with a little bit of that hang on to be able to sort of free themselves and to deploy into whatever that path is? Do you have anything there?
And I think the O of Roar is own it. Like, own it big time. You got to own all your shit. You got to own, let's start first with your health. That's the fundamental. So talk to the average 50-year-old and ask them, what is your blood pressure? What is your heart rate? What is your cholesterol? They're completely clueless, right? So you got to, many people. So you got to own your health. You got to own your financial well-being. You got to own your age. You got to own where you are at this point in life, and you got to take a brutal assessment as to where you are. People do get stuck. And in the book, we have a lot, aside from the inspirational stories, we have a lot of tools and resources about how you can get unstuck. And one of those things that I mentioned earlier is going back to your younger self. But you have to acknowledge that you're stuck. Then you have to think about, what are some of the ways that I can get unstuck? And so one fun game, and you can do this game over with a bunch of friends or your family, or a mix of the two. First of all, write down 5 words that you think describe yourself. And then ask 10 people to write down 5 words that they think describe you to them, and see if they match up, for starters, because our self-identifiers at times are a disconnect to the external world. We all know the person who says, I'm very empathetic. And you say, you're the least empathetic person I know. But take those words. And one of the great stories is a woman, she was an elementary school teacher, and she was stuck. She was just about to leave her job. She was done teaching. She was mother, raised her kids, married in outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And the word that she landed on for most of her friends was funny. And one of her friends said, you should do stand-up comedy. And she said, I don't even know what that means. And her daughter took her to an open mic session at a comedy club in Atlanta. This is obviously pre-COVID. And she's, 59 years old. She said, I got up on stage, and that self-definition of this sweet Southern woman just like busted out of me, and I became a completely different person. And she got lots of laughs from the audience. And she ended up going to comedy classes and studying comedy. And she became a stand-up comic, and she started working the circuit, in the whole Southeast. But if she hadn't said to her friends, help identify for me what you think is best about me, and funny was the word, and that took her on a path of getting unstuck. So it's just one example in the book of how you can do different everyday things that allow you to sort of get some clarity.
What I love about that is you're talking about essentially going to the closest circle in your life, right? I'm going to be the most vulnerable with this circle. I'm going to ask them the question, and then what's the feedback?
Right.
Absolutely. It's really, I do that with my family. I mean, we do pretty much every night. We talk about the thorn and the rose of your day.
There you go.
Tell me, how can our listeners learn more about you, your book, how they can sort of just maybe hop onto the train and learn and kind of maybe arrive at that conclusion? What does that look like?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. First of all, the book I'm very lucky. It's been a bestseller. It's going into its third printing. You can buy it on Amazon. It's Audible or Kindle, so there's no excuse. However you like to read, you can get it any which way. You're going to hear me read the book if you want. You can go on to roarbymichaelclinton.com and sign up for a newsletter that we just started. It's free. It's monthly, so we're not going to bug you every day with information, but it's going to be more of the same if you like the content. Our goal, and the goal of the Roar Manifesto, is to, particularly for people at midlife, to open up their minds, their possibilities, to help them get rid of self-imposed ageism, self-imposed barriers, self-imposed things that say, I can't do this or that because I'm making it up 50. I love to tell the story that when I ran the Toronto Marathon, I witnessed the first 100-year-old man cross the finish line, and he ran his first marathon when he was 82. So you can do anything if you open your mind up to the possibilities of it. So the book is all about that. That's
great, Michael. Thank you. And the other thing that I want to really talk about for a moment here before we wrap up, and by the way, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you. For the listeners, like, I reached out to Michael on social media, and I came across some of what he's doing, and it spoke to me, and it stroked my heart. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to reach out to this stranger and see if he's willing to do it. And here we are. So, but what I want to really understand from you is you're doing some incredible work as it relates to the war that's going on. And I'd love for you to spend a moment talking about what you're doing there and how people can potentially support, because I think that is, as we think about, you and I were chatting before we, went to recording, the realities of life is there's lots of things going on in the world that it's their third world to a lot of us here in the United States.
Yeah. Well, I'll start first with my passion for serving and service, and my passion for working in the nonprofit space. I'm on multiple boards. I have my own foundation that a group of us started about 12 years ago. We grant random acts of kindness to families in need anonymously, pay their rent for 6 months, get them food if they're food insecure, et cetera. So I kind of have this in my gene pool. But when I was 60 years old, I ran that marathon in Antarctica, which was one of the 7 continents. And I met a guy who was from Poland. His name is Marius, and I've got a little Polish blood in me from my mother's side. So we bonded and we became cousins. And we've met up with each other over the years at the Berlin Marathon and other places. And when the Ukrainian crisis happened, I reached out to Marius, who lives in Poznan, Poland, and said, what's happening there? And he proceeded to tell me about how in this small city that he lives in, they have 40,000 refugees, and they're scrambling to figure out how to help them. And so my immediate reaction was, well, how can I help? And it led to a conversation, which is now leading to a trip that I'm taking to Poland to work with him and some business leaders both as a volunteer and as to help them from a logistics standpoint, try to help people figure out what they're going to do for the Ukrainian refugees. And then my own foundation, we're going to do some grants while I'm there as well. So I like the hyper local human touch, person to person aspect of this. We all do, what we can do. Send money to the Red Cross if that's your thing. For me, it was, I need to go there and see how I can help and make a difference and make a contribution. And so I'm very honored and touched to be able to do this through my friend Marius.
That's incredible. Michael, I'm really inspired by sort of how you live your life. And And again, so much of, we work a lot in the wealth management space around succession planning, right? We work with a lot of advisors that are aging. They've been really trying to take care of their clients for 20, 30, 40 years. They want to retire. They want to have some other younger advisor come into that role, but they're like, but I've known you for 40 years. I've got to know your kids. Our kids know each other. We go to our kids' weddings. Like, there's incestual connectivity that happens because you can't help but like care and give. And that's part of what resonated with me. What I'd love to ask you is just sort of a last question is, if you were to think about the path you've been on in life and you were to choose a different path, what would that path have been?
Wow, that's a big question. I think that path would have probably been more from a service standpoint. I mentioned this earlier. When I was a young person and my family had no money. I mean, there was no money, there was no education, there was no contacts, there was no anything. I knew that if I was going to have a life was going to have any meaning, I needed to make a living. I needed to make money. I picked a profession which is not known for making a lot of money, publishing. Yet somehow it turned out that I made a very good living over the years as I grew into the senior ranks. So that was a means to an end. If I think back about it now, what it's allowed me to do is to be philanthropic. It has allowed me to serve on boards. It allows me to put multiple kids through college. It's allowed me to do many things that lifted people and circumstances. If it had been a different set of circumstances for me in my early 20s, I might have, been more focused on service and service organizations as a career path. But in my brain, I knew that I needed to set an example in the family. I needed to serve my own drive and ambition, and I needed to be able to make a living. And so now it's boomeranged, because now that I'm in my 60s, I'm able to give back a lot from a philanthropic standpoint, and I'm able to. That is my layer, my layers. In fact, I just finished a master's degree at Columbia University, where I studied nonprofit philanthropy in my master's, and I did that in my mid 60s. And so now that big layer is my new layer on my layer cake, all about service, giving back, and finding those ways to do it.
I think that, if you think about sort of the theme of life, I feel like that's probably like the perfect formula. You kind of go through an exploratory phase of life. I don't know who the hell I am. I don't know what I want to do. You go through a testing phase of life where I'm going to try lots of different things and I'm probably going to fail at most of them. You end up finding maybe potentially a lane that you can drive a car best in, and then you make good friends in that lane. And then perhaps when you get down the end of that roadway, you regroup with those friends and say, what can we do to give back to the people that are just entering that freeway? And I think you've done that. And I think kudos to you. I appreciate you, coming in and joining me. I want to regroup with you, because I think that as an organization, I think that we would like to contribute to what you're doing. I think that, life is short. It is a function of giving back to some generation that doesn't really know what the hell they're doing, and perhaps they do. And again, I got a 15-year-old son that, he's not in the room with me right now, and he thinks he knows everything. And there's going to come a day and time where I hope that he does a recall, and there's some knowledge base there. So thank you so much for your wisdom and your giving back.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be with you. It was a great conversation. I enjoyed it. Thanks, Ryan.
You got it.
Gentlemen, that was an insightful, inspiring, and really thoughtful discussion. Thank you.
Good.
And for all you listeners, don't miss the No BS podcast with Ryan Shanks. Follow the show to know when the latest episode is ready. And of course, share with colleagues and friends. Not only will they appreciate it, but it just might improve your karma. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of FA Match. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only.